Hello and welcome, bonjour et bienvenue, buenos dias y bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Welcome to the second day of the 6th Annual KIX Global Symposium on Using Evidence for Education Finance and for Scaling Innovation. I'm Ian McPherson, lead of the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange at the Global Partnership for Education based in Washington, D.C., and I'll be chairing today. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have questions or technical issues, please use the chat function and we will do our best to assist you. Interpretation in English, French, and Spanish is available. Please select the language of your choice, and if desired, you can also mute the original audio. L'interprétation en anglais, français et espagnol est disponible. La interpretación en inglés, francés y español está disponible. The PowerPoint in French and Spanish is available in the chat. Next slide, please. The button for interpretation is located at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. During the sessions, if you have questions for our panelists, please post them in the chat. And at the end of each session, the moderator will select some questions to ask the speakers. And this year, we've set up a virtual whiteboard where you can share your thoughts with the panelists and with other participants. And the link you will find in the chat. Next slide, please. For the whiteboard, you can share your ideas. For example, what kind of evidence is being or should be used to inform sustainable financing for education in your context? You can also share your experience. For example, which examples resonate most with you about using evidence to guide resource allocation in education? And you can share your tools. What tools or approaches have you seen or used to provide useful evidence about costing and financing innovation? Thank you to all of the participants who already shared some insights yesterday. Next slide, please. This year's symposium addresses a critical challenge, the global education financing crisis. Yesterday, we explored how evidence can serve as a powerful tool for shaping smarter, more equitable, and more sustainable investment strategies. As aid declines, the urgency for fiscal realism, efficiency, and system transformation has never been greater. We heard about the need for diverse types of evidence to inform policy choices, guide investment design, and support the scaling of impactful innovations, from macro-fiscal diagnostics to cost-effectiveness studies. We saw how the GPE multiplier is helping countries shift from fragmented funding toward coherent, sustainable financing pathways. Real-world examples such as the Prevail Fund and BRACE illustrated how evidence is shaping financing mechanisms. GPE KIX is also increasingly informing policy and financing decisions, and yesterday we heard from partners around the world how evidence generated and shared through its regional hubs is influencing resource allocation at the national level, partnership compacts, and is helping countries leverage other sources of funding. And finally, we asked you, what actions should be taken? And this is what you told us. Here we have the word cloud. Perhaps most significantly, obviously financing. More financing, better financing, but incredibly significant is evidence-informed investment. Next slide, please. Today, we will shift our focus to the practical side and explore what tools, data, and processes do policymakers need to make informed financing decisions and scale effective innovations. The session will be divided into two parts. After opening remarks, we'll take a deep dive into the decision-making process and discuss different pathways policymakers use to adopt and finance education innovations. In our second session, we'll focus on one of the types of evidence essential for decision-making, cost-effectiveness studies, featuring how these are conducted through GPE KIX applied research projects. And finally, we'll summarize our discussions and close the day. Next slide, please. Now, please let me introduce Julie Delahanty, President of the International Development Research Centre of Canada, who will offer opening remarks. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Thank you to GPE for co-hosting this annual symposium with the International Development Research Centre and for partnering with us through KIX. We're truly proud of this joint effort with GPE. Together, we've been successful in sharing learning across countries, generating new evidence, and turning that evidence into action to strengthen education systems. Le symposium du programme KIX de cette année a lieu à un moment critique dans le monde. La croissance économique, la santé et bien sûr l'éducation sont des fondements essentiels de la prospérité.
Evidently, talking about economy, health, and education as a fundamental part for resilience and stability. These foundations and essential foundations are threatened. We have current challenges obliging us to work together. The challenges cross borders and the collective of sectors, and there's no collective that could work on its own. That is why we will perform our work with GPE. When all together we reinforce the educational systems to make more children able to go to school and acquire knowledge.
It's a necessity. In our search for sustainable, inclusive solutions, research ensures that decisions are based on evidence, not assumptions. It builds trust, fosters dialogue, and strengthens institutions. To yield these results, research must be led by those most affected by the challenges that we need to solve. This applies especially to education. For policymakers, evidence shows how and why to invest domestic funds. This evidence to support decision-making is vital when needs are growing and when resources are constrained. Through KIX, researchers are generating compelling evidence that governments need to make sustainable financing decisions. For example, through KIX-supported evidence and policy dialogue, South Sudan developed its first early childhood education policy and implementation plan. This policy change led to an increase in budget allocations for pre-primary education, acknowledging the importance of investing in this critical area. KIX research also supports policymakers to scale effective innovations. For example, in Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, evidence showed the benefit of older children supporting younger ones to develop early literacy, numeracy, and school readiness, particularly in communities lacking access to formal preschool education. Based on this evidence, the Hilton Foundation helped to scale an inclusive home-based early learning model for refugee communities in northern Uganda. IDRC's long experience scaling up proven innovations offers lessons on how to scale responsibly, balancing ambition with equity and sustainability. Grâce au programme KIX, le CRDI continuera de travailler en étroite collaboration avec les pays partenaires du GPI pour cerner
In that way, we could work together in cooperation with all the GPE KIX partners to reinforce capacity and to have solutions that are in the base of this evidence, creating occasions like this, where we could learn one from the other.
And to discuss how to scale proven approaches. We'll hear from researchers and decision makers on how concrete evidence is informing smart financial decisions and ensuring inclusive, equitable access to quality education. Knowledge and innovation are crucial to tackle today's challenges and to shape a better future. On behalf of IDRC, thank you to GPE for your continued partnership, and thank you all for your commitment to a better future for education. I wish you a productive time together. Thank you so much. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Julie. Thank you for spotlighting how GPE KIX supported research helps policymakers scale effective innovations. and welcome to colleagues who continue to join. Please do take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and where you are joining us from. Research for and about scaling is at the core of GPE KIX, ensuring that we not only identify what works in the education sector, but also understand how to effectively bring innovations to scale while maintaining sustainability of their impact. Over the past 5 years, with GPE KIX, the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution has been implementing the ROSI project, an acronym that stands for the Research on Scaling the Impact of Innovations. This action research works closely with Southern-led organizations around the world to support and systematically learn from their scaling efforts. I'm delighted now to introduce Brad Olson, Senior Fellow at the Center for Universal Education, who will be moderating our first session with 3 policymakers who have kindly agreed to guide us through the decision-making processes on how innovations are adopted, financed, and scaled. Brad, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. I'd also like to thank GPE and IDRC. This is a wonderful opportunity to get together and talk a little bit about this work that's so important to all of us. What I'd like to do is frame the panel conversation that I'm about to moderate by sharing some relevant research that we've been doing in ROSI. Scaling promising and proven innovations is incredibly important. I think it's particularly important in this day and age. In this funding tight climate, we need to make sure that we are focusing on the right innovations. Those are the scalable ones. Those are the ones that can catalyze systems change. And therefore, I think it's incredibly important that we be able to understand how to make the decisions about which innovations ought to be scaled, ought to be supported at scale. Government officials and other decision makers are bombarded with promising and proven innovations. And in each case, the owner of the innovation really hopes that the government will adopt it, adapt it, and support it for scale. But there are just too many innovations. Too many of them have good evidence behind them. And so the question on our minds today for this panel is, how do decision makers go about the work of deciding which innovations to adopt, adapt, and support at scale? Rosie did some work on this topic, researching central level decision making in 8 low and middle income countries, and I'll share a little bit about that. The other piece of this, however, is the middle level of education governance and support. These are the officers and the folks who work with them at the subnational level, but above the school level. There's a complex space that we might call the middle tier that is really instrumental, we believe, but oftentimes unrealized in terms of its ability to engage in the support for scaling innovations. And so we have just completed research on that topic. The research report actually came out yesterday. We'll make it available. We are holding an event tomorrow where we're going to have a panel and talk about this middle level research. You all are welcome to join. And so I'll talk a little bit about that today. These 2 topics will then frame the conversation that I'll have with my honored panelists. Next slide, please. Ian mentioned a little bit about what Rosie is and what Rosie does, and it's essentially what Rosie has been doing within the KIX universe is 3 different things. One of them is we created a capacity strengthening or a global learning community for all of the current KIX research teams. That's 42 teams working in over 50 countries. We learn from them. We engage them in talking with and learning from each other. We really believe that peer learning and social learning is a really important feature of global development. And so we support that work. The second thing we do, as Ian had mentioned, is an action research, scaling research project to better understand what works in scaling and under what conditions. And then the third thing, which is what I'll talk a little bit about today, is that we've been engaged in ongoing complementary research. This is qualitative research that we and Rosie are doing to better understand the decision-making processes around which innovations to adopt, adapt, and support for scale. Next slide, please. And so that complementary strand of research has been going on for about 5 years now. And the first phase, as I mentioned, we looked at the central level governance. And the second phase, which is just wrapping up now, we looked at the mid-level governance and support. We've written several reports and several blogs and many tools, and those are available online. Next slide, please. I won't spend too much time talking about the research methods. We can talk about that if anyone is interested. But essentially, for that first round of research, we focused on 8 countries. And then for the second round, we chose 4 of those 8 to do a deeper dive by looking at this middle tier. This work that is just finished, we conducted 90 interviews in these 4 countries. We collaborated with researchers in each of the countries to better understand the capacity for the middle tier to contribute to education improvement. Next slide, please. There's a lot to say about central level decision making, and I expect that our panelists will have some really thoughtful perspectives to share. But I do want to mention just quickly that what we found, and this probably doesn't surprise many of you, is there essentially are 2 tracks of government decision making. There is the formal, explicit government decision making track that we hear about, where information is collected and working groups are created, and there's a very kind of rational, linear process of identifying priorities and then finding solutions or innovations that meet the priorities that have been identified. I think that seems really clear. But what's very important is that there's a second track of government decision making. This is incredibly idiosyncratic. This is about the difficulty that government officials have in balancing multiple constituencies, external donors with internal needs, all of the trade-offs that exist around wanting to do things quickly, but making sure they last, making sure that rural areas have their needs met as well as the urban areas. Right now with ed tech and AI, there is a huge pressure to go digital, which isn't always the best thing to do for particular issues. So this complexity is what makes, in many ways, decision-making not as rational and not as linear as many people believe. One of the things that we have found is that government decisions about accepting or not an innovation have only a little bit to do with the innovation itself, and only a little bit to do with the actual scaling strategy. But what seems most salient is how the innovation and how the scaling strategy fit into the broader policy-making environment. And that means even the best innovation and the best scaling strategy might not be accepted and supported at scale if it doesn't somehow fit into the policy-making environment. I expect that the panelists will talk a little bit about that. What we did was we opened up that black box, if you will, of decision making, and we found that there are 5 different dimensions that can explain the complexity of government decision making around education reform. Next slide, please. In the reports, we go into this in great detail. I don't think I have the time now, but there is an awful lot of complexity around national politics and how decision makers must balance many contradictions within their national political landscape. The external donor priorities are a really important force and factor that offers sometimes competing incentives for what a government is really interested in. The concept of education transfer, which means we're living in a world where innovations designed in one place for one location are being moved around the world and transferred from location to location. That's both a good thing and it's also a problematic thing. The fourth factor is the rise of education technology and how there are so many pressures for government decision makers to bring their education systems into a digital era, sometimes in ways that don't always fit the characteristics of the location. And then the final factor that we found is, although everyone talks about the importance of evidence and the importance of data, it's not always available, it's not always used, and it's not always trustworthy. Next slide, please. This diagram is meant to characterize what we found as we talk to government decision makers about how they make their decisions. I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but what we found is that whether they're aware of it or not, these government decision makers are thinking along three different continua as they decide whether or not to accept a particular innovation. They're thinking about the motivation for accepting that innovation. Will it help them politically? Will it help the people in the location? Is there a strong reason or an inspiration for taking this innovation on? That motivation level can be low or high or somewhere in the middle. Then there's the feasibility continuum. How feasible is it actually to scale this innovation? Can it be scaled? Can it be scaled easily? Does the capacity currently exist to scale it successfully? That can be a low, medium, or a high level. And then the third dimension is sustainability. If this innovation is accepted and implemented towards scale, will it last? Or will it be replaced in a couple of years by the next thing, or the next government? Or once the funding runs out, will it fade away? These three dimensions become incredibly important. And as we think about the kind of evidence needed for decision makers to make good decisions, we might suggest that what they need is information that will help them increase the motivation, increase the feasibility, and increase the sustainability so that they feel comfortable accepting an innovation. Next slide, please. So moving on to the middle tier. What we've learned from our work is that the middle tier of education, governance, and support, and again, that's below the central level and above the school level, that includes government officials and also folks from CSOs and NGOs and funders who work at this middle level. This middle tier has got incredible potential to contribute to education improvement. But what we found, at least in the 4 countries that we studied, is that potential is unrealized. It's untapped. So let me first tell you why we believe there is such important potential. This middle tier has accumulated experience from their own work in education or in governance or in other areas. They have learned a lot, and that learning can be used to contribute to central government efforts to improve education. They also have local knowledge. They know their jurisdiction oftentimes better than the central decision makers. They have what we call an in-between positioning. Structurally, they're above the schools, but they're below the central government. They're really the only structural level that splits the two. And so in that way, they can offer a bridge that translates policy and program down from the central level into meaningful, manageable reforms that can be implemented. And at the same time, they can share challenges, assets, and knowledge from the local level back up to the central level. So in theory, they can operate as this really wonderful connective tissue between the top and the bottom. The third thing is, by definition, they're committed to their jurisdictions. They care about their locations in ways that other people might not. And then finally, because they have relationships with the local folks, they are best positioned to secure local ownership so an innovation has impact that gets sustained even after the initial funding and the initial enthusiasm run out. Next slide. So they have all of this potential, but in our research, what we found is that at least in these 4 countries, again, we're talking about El Salvador, the Kyrgyz Republic, Malawi, and Nepal, the central governments did not involve mid-level offices very much in innovation decisions or implementation leadership. They really weren't making use of these assets or these contributions. We found that data and EMIS isn't much used at the middle level. Mid-level officials oftentimes collect and compile information and send it up to the central level, but they're not encouraged or supported or trained to actually use the data themselves for decision making. Instructional leadership, which we talk a lot about in the global education community, doesn't seem to exist much at this mid-level. They simply don't have the time or the training to engage in instructional support because they're so busy with the compliance and administration and data collection duties that they're charged with. We found very little in-country or cross-country learning. We really believe that peer exchange is valuable, and we think there ought to be a lot more of this at this middle level. And then finally, external donors and NGOs who may be engaged in designing, developing, and piloting or scaling innovations in these jurisdictions do not typically work with the middle level. They work with the central level, and the middle level is really used as just kind of a coordinating body or a compliance body, and we think that that misses potential. Next slide, please. So what does all of this mean, and how can this frame the panel conversation that we're about to have? I think that all of us need to best understand the complex balancing act that central level government decisions have to make. In other words, if we're trying to support an innovation that we hope will be adopted by government, we have to think like the government. We have to understand the pressures and the balancing act that they are required to engage in. There are real incentives around electoral politics, the external donors, and ed tech that creates trade-offs, that creates some inadvertent forces and factors that I think should not be ignored, but should actually be addressed and maybe mitigated or changed. Thinking about not just having more data or more accessible data in countries, but actually creating a culture of data use seems incredibly important, we believe. And then finally, when it comes to engaging the middle level, we'd like to talk about what it means to foster a virtuous circle of middle tier strengthening. In other words, a systems change that includes the mid-level and supports the mid-level and trains the mid-level to leverage their assets in order to contribute to a country's decisions around which innovations to adopt, adapt, and support at scale. Next slide, please. So that was a way to sort of frame the topic. And I now would like to turn to our panelists and have a conversation with them. We are very fortunate to have three panelists join us today for this first part of today's session. The first is Honorable Felix Mluso, who is the former Minister of Finance in Malawi. Thank you, sir, for being here. The second is Ms. Esfacini Serrato, the Director of Curriculum and Evaluation at the Secretary of Education in Honduras. Bienvenido. Gracias. Thank you for being here. And then the third is Shailendra Jha, who's a former board member and City Planning Commission in Kathmandu, Nepal. Thank you for joining us today. What I'd like to do is ask a couple of questions, and maybe I'll suggest that you respond in the order in which I've just introduced you, and we can have a conversation about these topics that I've raised so far. The first question, and kind of a general question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Mluso, is given the comments that I've just made, the remarks that I've just shared, do any of them resonate with you in your own work? And if so, which ones?
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, all. Thank you for inviting me, to join this panel. Based on the research that was done, I find that, the involvement of the mid-tier level is critical in scaling up innovation because this is the level that is involved in the monitoring and overseeing the implementation of the plans that central government makes. This is the level that has a hands-on approach in a lot of areas and has a better understanding of the implications of scaling up innovations for education. So I feel that this is a very critical level that really should be actively involved. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd like to follow up with you, Mr. Maluso. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm wondering if it's the case that a government tends to constrain the middle level to only monitoring, is it losing the opportunity to include mid-level in some of the decision making around which innovations to design or develop or choose? Are there efforts, have you seen efforts either in Malawi or elsewhere to allow mid-level governance officials to do more than just the monitoring, but actually have some authority to make decisions?
I have not, seen serious efforts in really involving the mid-tier, level in the decision-making process. What I've seen is just to, use the mid-level, for information collection, data, collection. But what I think as governments we are losing out, especially like here in Malawi, is that there are a lot of areas that need scaling up. And these mid-tier level, they actually know which areas need to be scaled up. For example, looking at the number of pupils that go to primary school or even to secondary school, looking at the way the instruction or the teaching is made, it is still what I would call archaic. It's really the old system. And yet there are now modern and emerging technologies that can be used. And these people at the mid-level, they know these things, but they are really not given the opportunity to get involved in the planning process and indeed in the decision-making, which I think is a great loss that as a country we are experiencing.
Thank you. Ms. Serato, of the remarks that I shared at the beginning, are there any that resonate with you that you might like to talk about?
Hola a todos, mucho gusto.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, there are two important things that were mentioned by Brad. And one of these is the quantity of initiatives that could arrive to different ministries. In the case of our country, Honduras, I represent the Secretariat of Education at this moment, the Curriculum and Evaluation General Directorate. The amount of initiatives arriving to ministries depends a lot sometimes on that decision making in a very short term, because you do not necessarily have lots of time for the analysis. And the staff in the mid-tier is key. We have realized that there are initiatives where it was taken into consideration as they have knowledge, they have a quantity of information of a local level that you take into consideration, and it causes changes in the way in which we could manage projects. But it also is influential in the amount of investment as a country to sustain these sort of initiatives, and for how long we will need that, because the time of investment for people in different job positions need to be considered, so the initiatives could be taken longer. I think we need to keep it. We are in coincidence with the mid-tier experience, and it's very influential, as I said, on how long they will stay in their directive position to continue with the initiatives for longer.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a follow-up question about that, if you don't mind. And I'm thinking about the incredible popularity around the world right now of digital technology for education, whether it's AI or another kind of ed tech. And specifically within the context of the Secretary of Education in Honduras, do you all feel pressure to give extra attention to digital innovations, and or are they considered and decided truly only on their merits?
La verdad que está
To
el
be
tema clave dentro
honest,
de los
this
puntos
is a
principales del
subject that
cambio
is one of the
político de
main
2023,
points.
inicios de 2024,
In
sucedió esto de
2023
cambios
and the
legislativos
beginning
de
of
2011, donde se
2024,
le
the
consultaba a los maestros
characterization
para
of
cuáles
the
eran las
staff
necesidades de
of
formación,
teachers,
y una de
the
ellas
teachers were
obviamente
asked,
era mucho
what do you
mejorar
need?
habilidades
And one
digitales.
was
Sí es
digital
cierto, pero
skills.
también es de visualizar
It
las
is
utopías,
there,
¿verdad? Uno
but
desde la
we
mirada
need
pedagógica
to
y entender
visualize
esa nueva
from the
legislación,
pedagogic
cómo estos
and the
datos nos pueden,
management side
tener estos datos a mano nos pueden apoyar
how
para esta
this
toma de
piece
decisiones
of
más
data
oportunas
contributes in a
y
timely
desde la mirada
decision
de los
making.
distintos
From
niveles,
that point of view,
escalenos,
we
desde
look
nivel
at different
local, tenemos
levels.
cierta
From the local level,
información
we have
que
some
responde
information
a una mirada
that
más
could give a
departamental en
response
nuestro caso,
to a
particularmente
very
los hechos
departmental view. We have 18
pero
departments.
ya desde el nivel
But
central tenemos un
from the
desarrollo
central level, we have a global view
de todo el país, ¿verdad?
of the
Entonces
whole
sí es
country.
necesario poder
And yes,
tener
it is necessary to
esos
have
insumos desde
the
esa
input
mirada del uso de
and
los
that
datos
view
y
of
poder
using
utilizarlos bien
data,
en ese
technology,
doble rol, ¿verdad? En un rol
and in
pedagógico
a
y ese
role
rol
that is
de
double,
gestión de información.
pedagogical and managing information as well.
Thank you, Ms. Zarato. I'm especially struck by that point you just made about the need to balance the sort of local differences of each department in a country against the sort of more national or global perspective. And that balancing act is a very difficult one. Thank you. Mr. Jha, I would like to turn to you and ask the same question. Of the things that I shared at the beginning to start this conversation, is there any one topic that you'd like to talk a little bit about?
At first, namaste and good morning from Nashville. I would like to congratulate team. I would say like the research, I would agree with the research completely. And I don't know how did you manage to come up with all the realities of the ground related to my country, I would say. And I totally agree with you. So right now, I'm following with previous panelists, following their remarks. I would like to add, like in context of Nepal, Nepal is a federal structure and it has opened the doors for innovation. But our old system still slows us down. So in Nepal, federal constitution was formulated in 2015, and we have local government as per the constitution since 2017. But Nepal is following Education Act that was formulated in 1971. So we see our constitution is like, I would say the most advanced constitution we have. I would say that our policy is updated, but our act is more than 50 years old. Our act was formulated in a manner where central government controls all over the country, all over the education system. But with the new constitution, even though the act is conventional, it creates the door for some of the local governments, and some of the local governments are able to adopt the new practices, and they are able to bring some innovations, and this validates decentralization works, and open and flexible systems enable innovations. One of the innovations that I would like to share with you is the Book Free Friday that Kathmandu Metropolitan City has successfully implemented.
I want to ask you about that, Mr. Jha, because I'm really struck by what you're saying about Nepal in particular. So this is a country that in many ways right now is in limbo because it's got technically a federalism that has turned over the autonomy to every one of the 753 municipalities. Yes. They have the mandate to innovate. They are charged with innovation. And yet there's a system in which the central government still allocates the resources, is still in charge of hiring and firing teachers, is still the level that external NGOs and funders have to go through. And so it's a little bit like Nepal wants a little bit of each side. And so within that constraint or that stasis, maybe you talk about the book Free Friday. This is an example, if I understand correctly, of how the Kathmandu municipal city has been able to actually achieve a wonderful success around innovation, even in spite of the complexities. Why was Kathmandu able to design and develop and implement a successful innovation right now?
So thank you very much for this wonderful question. And I would like to say, before going to Kathmandu, like there are a lot of different innovations that we can realize right now in Nepal, practices by some of the local governments. But talking about Book Free Friday, I would say like the mayor of the city, he followed the manifesto that he had prepared before going to the election. As a planner, we planned and we drafted the policy, local policy, as per the manifesto, and we considered this manifesto as a vision. And then entirely on first year, we allocated some budget and we piloted the program. After piloting the program, we realized we had some evidences, and following those evidences, we scaled up the Book Free Friday. So, and while implementing those processes, it was not only, we did not limit our interventions to the vision of the mayor. We engaged all the political leaders, people representative, and we collaborated with more than 200 organizations that include central level government agencies, that include development partners, that include private staff partners, that include startups and entrepreneurs. So one of the best thing that I would say, that it was not only the collaboration, it was the radical collaboration that Kathmandu metropolitan city was able to implement, and that ensured the success of Book Free Friday.
Thank you. It reminds me that a system is like a current in an ocean. It's moving in one direction, and it's so much easier to go in the direction that the current is already headed. But the question, and I think you've answered it nicely, is what does it take to go against the current, to try and do something that doesn't fit within the maneuvers of the system? And the answer here is, it sounds like an uncommon leader, someone who had this idea before the election and actually ran on the election, someone who was able to organize a team of folks around the ideas. These are some important lessons. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much for asking this question.
I'd like to move to the second question. I think it's been really interesting to hear that there are differences and similarities across 3 different countries. And so I'm going to start with you, Mr. Mluso. Based on your own experience working within government structures at different levels, what are the factors that influence decisions to adopt an innovation?
Thank you very much, Brad. There are obviously so many factors, but those that immediately come to mind, first of all, are factors that are already on the ground. So you got to look at what you already have, on the ground, and also you look at what are the shortfalls on what you already have, and these factors that you look at, you start with fiscal infrastructure, for example, schools, whether it's primary schools or indeed secondary schools. And just to give you, a feel for Malawi, we have a population now of close to 22 million people. About 52% of that population is the youth. So it's quite a very, high population, of the young people that we have. But we have enrollment in primary schools of just about 5.4, million, children or million kids, that, go to, primary schools. We have roughly about, just below 7,000, primary schools, the whole country, out of such a big population. And you talk about secondary schools, we have less than, 1,500 secondary schools, the whole country. So this is, one of the things that, makes decision makers to look at, what, are we supposed to do, to accommodate, these, youth that we have. We need, classrooms. We need libraries. And, we need learning materials. We need teaching materials, for such, a population. And you can see that out of the, youth population, the, children going to school is just a drop, really, in what, should be the actual number, that should be going to school, both at primary and as well as secondary. So the factors, obviously, you look at, physical infrastructure, learning and teaching materials, teachers who obviously play a very important, role. We have less than 100,000 teachers, the whole country, which with a high, teacher, pupil ratio of, between, it's about 1 to 150, pupils in primary schools. So if you're, looking at, scaling up, you have to look at these factors and see what is it as government, as central government, needs to do in order to improve, these facilities. Not to talk about the emerging technologies that, we have to embrace. The whole country, we have roughly, about 6,000, tablets, computers that are used, in schools and largely, in secondary schools. So the factors that really influence decision makers, or that which needs to be considered, include all these factors. And of course, at the end of it, is the financial resources, that, as a country, we must have.
Yeah, thank you very much. What you really remind me is, I remember in graduate school learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the idea that there are some foundational needs, and then you move up the pyramid. And it sounds, Mr. Mluso, like what you're saying a little bit is we can't ignore the basic needs, infrastructure, teachers, buildings that are safe. Those sometimes are the most cost-effective innovations, and some of the more sophisticated ones can't exist until we have the foundation in place. I have a story, and I know every one of you in this call has something similar, but I was in a country, I won't name it which one, and I was visiting a school, and they were showing me the school, and I told the head teacher that I had learned that a computer company had been really instrumental in offering laptops for the students, and that I hadn't seen those in the school. And she laughed, and she opened up a closet door, and they were all stacked in a closet covered with dust. And she says, that's what happened to our computers. And I asked her why, and she said, we don't have the connectivity. The mice and rats would eat the cables. We had never been taught how to use the computers, and so we just leave them in the closet. And I think about that a lot. Let's turn to Honduras. Ms. Sorato, when you think about all of the factors that have to be considered when decision makers are choosing innovations, what are the factors that you all think about in Honduras?
Muchas gracias. Creo que estoy
Thank you
totalmente de
so
acuerdo con
much. I
Félix.
totally agree
También
with
comprendo el
Felix,
caso
and I understand
que
the
viviste en
case that
escuela,
you
¿verdad?
saw in
De
that
unos
school that
computadores que
you
estaban
mentioned
ahí,
of
pero
all
que
those
esa
computers that
iniciativa
were
muy buena
abandoned, piled
pero no
up. We see
necesariamente
beautiful
responden al
initiatives
contexto.
that do not respond or
Entonces,
meet
desde la
the
toma de decisiones,
context's
creo que se
needs.
consideraría
From the
5
decision
factores
making,
claves,
I
¿verdad?
consider
Uno,
5
¿cuál es
key
la temática
factors.
del
First,
proyecto
what's the topic of the
que se está
project
considerando como,
that
como
we are
innovación?
considering
¿Cuáles
as an
son las claves
innovation?
que
Who
nosotros
are the
estamos
key
necesitando
actors
para
that
poder
we
llevar
identify
esta
in order
iniciativa?
to bring this
¿Qué,
initiative?
¿En qué
Under
contexto, verdad?
which
¿Cuáles serían esas
context? What are
características
the
para
main
poder llevar
features or characteristics
esta
to
iniciativa?
bring these initiatives?
¿Cuál podría ser el tiempo
Fourth,
de
which could
ejecución?
be the time of
Porque muchas veces
execution?
son muy buenas iniciativas,
Because
pero
we
no
see
responden
nice
a la
initiatives,
realidad
but they
de
do not
tiempo de toda
meet or
escuela.
comply
¿Por qué?
with
Porque
the
se tiene que
time
llevar ese
reality
frente
of
la
schools
su
because
planificación,
teachers have to do their
estructurar una
planning, they
idea
have to structure
y
their
cuando llegamos a
ideas.
mitad de año,
And
porque esta
whenever we
iniciativa que
reach
puede
half of the
ser muy
year with
buena,
some initiatives that
vamos
might be
y
very
le
good,
movemos mucho el
we
esquema que de
move
repente ya
the
tenían planificado
scheme that
para
they
poder
already
completar
had
de repente
planned
su,
to finish
su
their
trimestre, su parcial
quarter
o su
or
tiempo,
their
¿verdad?
semester
Y
and
luego,
their time.
¿cuál es la inversión que
And number
tocaría hacer
5,
una
what's the
vez
investment
que
that
se
we
vaya el
need
proyecto, ¿verdad?
in
¿Qué es lo que
order
tiene
the
que asumir
project
el
is
país? ¿Qué
approved?
es la
What is it
realidad para
that
el
the
país
country
poder
has to assume?
hacerlo y
And
no
what's the
generarnos una
reality or the
escalabilidad, ¿verdad?
feasibility
¿Qué
of
tan
this
real es poder
cost
decir,
in
bueno,
terms
para
of
poder tener este
how to
investment,
make it
la vamos
scalable
a llevar a
in
nivel nacional?
terms
¿Qué es
of
lo que usted
Honduras,
se
and that we
espera
are going to apply
cuando
that
se hace
at a
la inversión?
national level?
¿Cuándo
That's
podemos
what
ver
we expect when
realmente
we are
que
running these
aquellos donde
investments.
estamos llegando
So
con esos
in general
iniciativas,
terms, these are the
los
5
aspectos que se tienen
aspects
que
that
ir
we
considerando a
consider
medida que vamos tomando ciertas iniciativas
as we take
y
some
obviamente,
initiatives
¿verdad? Tener
and
en cuenta cuál es la
take into
realidad
account
o el
the
momento que están
reality
viviendo
or the
dentro del año
momentum
lectivo, dentro del
the
parcial
school is
de país y
living
poder
and
decir qué
the
tanto
country
corresponde
vision that we may have
a
and how
esa
this
planificación
meets
estratégica que
that
ya se había hecho
strategic planning the school has
tanto desde el nivel central como
from
se
the
va
central
acompañado
level,
en nuestro caso, ¿verdad?
and in our
De estas
case
planificaciones
that is
anuales
along
desde
with
cada
these
uno de los departamentos y cómo se
annual
logra mantener ese
plannings, and
equilibrio.
how do we
Entonces,
keep
por
that
ahí
balance?
mi
That's
aportación.
my contribution.
That is such a helpful response. I'm really struck by the kind of framework that you put forward, the topic, or the key actors, the context, the timeline, and the investment needed against the investment that exists. That's just so thoughtful. And I want to ask you, Ms. Sarato, how do you all, if at all, use evidence to try and better understand each of those 5 top categories? And where does the evidence come from?
Bueno, sabemos que a nivel
Well,
de
we
la
know
región,
that at a
caso
regional level
particular de
and
Centroamérica,
in
¿verdad?
Central America
No
level,
siempre hay muchos estudios que
we
sean
don't have many
generalizados.
studies at a local level.
Entonces, cuesta un poco
So
poder
it is
decir que sea la
hard to
evidencia
say
que
that we use
responda
the evidence
realmente
that
a la
responds
realidad del
actually to the
contexto.
reality
Y
of
en
the
los casos que sí
context.
hay, pues
And in the
obviamente se tienen
cases
ahí
where we do have
los
data
reportes,
or
los
evidence,
informes.
we have the
Sí
support, the
se toma
reports,
mucho en
we
cuenta
take into
el
account
poder escuchar al personal
the
desde la experiencia
listening
que ellos
to the
tienen,
staff
hacer
from
esos
their
espacios, esos
experience
encuentros,
to have
la
these
estructura que nosotros
meetings.
tenemos como
The
Secretaría de
structures
Educación
that we
permite,
have as
¿verdad?
a Secretary of
Tenemos a
Education
nivel central,
allows us
tenemos
to have this.
desarrollado unos
We have a
estudios
central level,
descentralizados que
a
serían como las
decentralized
direcciones
level that
departamentales
are the
y
department
tenemos
directorates, and
los
also
directores municipales
we
y
have
distritales.
the municipal
Y
and district
normalmente se logra
directors.
mucho tener
What we
una
do is to
comunicación
have
fluida entre
a very
departamentales
fluid
y
communication with the
el
departments
nivel central.
and the central
Se
level.
pierde un poco la comunicación
We
ya con los directores
miss the
municipales
communication with the
y se
municipal
quedan cortos
directors
cantidad
and
de
the district
personas que de
directors
repente
because
están
of the
dentro
amount of
de los
people
cargos,
that
¿verdad?
work in these
Entonces,
areas or in these
influye mucho
positions.
poder
So
escucharnos
we
en
have this,
esta
we
iniciativa
listen
a
to
fin de año,
them
a inicio de
when
año,
they
estas
are
decisiones que de
planning or
repente
when
hay,
they are
se
preparing their
pierde un poco
planning.
esa línea de comunicación
And we
cuando hay
lose
un cambio
sometimes that
de
communication line
gobierno
when there
y
is
por
this
eso es
transition between
que
in the
particularmente se
government.
apuesta mucho, ¿verdad?
So
we bet for the role of the technical team in the ministries of education, because these are people that are in certain areas, in certain positions, in very permanent positions, and then maintain that balance between the communication between the decentralized and the centralized levels. That's what we do, that we have this balance. We listen in these meetings, although these are particular topics. In the end, we always have this room for listening and to include other topics as well that might be interesting to them. And we organize this kind of map based on the needs they have.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really thoughtful. And I appreciate at the end you brought up this important point that there are those officials who do not turn over with every administration. And they might be the ones who are really making the world go round, right? These are the permanent secretaries. These are the technical advisors. These are the ones who really get to know the context in a way that might be useful. One of the things that we found in our research is they have the knowledge and they have the commitment, but they don't always have the authority to make decisions. The ones who have the authority to make the decisions are the elected officials, but they don't always have the long-term commitment and the knowledge. And so it becomes incredibly important to create partnerships between both sides. Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Jha, I'll ask the same question to you. When you think about Kathmandu Municipal City, what are the forces and factors that are in play when decision makers are choosing innovations to adopt?
I think I agree with my previous panelist, and reflecting on my own experience, I would say like there are three factors at first: leaders, capacity, and resources. If these three factors comes together, innovations happen. So let me explain. Like political and administrative will is important. Secondly, motivation of school leaders and teachers. Beside motivation, teacher and leadership competency is needed. Beside all those things, we need to have at least basic infrastructure and availability of resources. So if I summarize everything, I would say in the context of Nepal, in the context of Kathmandu metropolitan city, policy is there. I would not say like we need to redraft the policy, but resources and skills are missing. So we can say we have good policy, but we have weak practices. And I would say like we can say like these are both opportunity as well as challenges and barriers.
Yeah, that's useful. I feel like, Mr. Jha, you should write a book. I will write the introduction for you. And your book should be called Leaders, Capacity, and Resources. That's a wonderful title. Yeah. But let me ask you, one of the things that we learned from our research in Nepal is that the locations, the municipalities, or what we call palikas, tend to operate in isolation from each other. They're not always sharing what they're doing in their own location. They're not always learning from each other. There aren't peer exchange networks. And we learned that that's partly because everyone is busy. It's partly because there are no structures for peer exchange across municipalities. We learned that it's partly because there is not a culture of sharing in Nepal. And in fact, there are even some political rivalries, or some, maybe we might call them ego issues, where leaders don't want to be perceived as if they're copying innovations from other locations. So my question to you is that true? And do you think there would be value to creating a peer exchange network of mid-level leaders in Nepal?
I think like you have done research in a best manner, and I would agree with you. But I would also say we need to see the possibilities. Like Nepal is very new in the federal system, and we are not used to have this many stakeholders for this to address the same problem. And the good thing is like now people are understanding their strength, their competencies, and they are coming together. In Kathmandu metropolitan city, like I would say, like either it's a book free Friday or teacher college program or creative school or any kind of innovations that we have introduced. We have collaborated with like more than hundreds, I would say more than 200 stakeholders. So when we work for 2 years, then we realized for the sustainability of these innovations, we need to bring more stakeholders who are in the government. So we collaborated with different local governments. We were not able to invite all the 753 local governments, but we have 7 provinces, and from each provinces we invited 2 to 3 local governments, and we conducted some workshops, and we came to realize like there are different innovations being practiced in local context which we are not aware, and we all can learn from each other. Following that, we came up with 2 big events. One focused on students, where we not only invited the students from our local government, but students from different paths, and they were able to demonstrate their learning through exhibitions, through art, and through performance. And then, and following that, after a few months, we conducted one big seminar with 5 different themes, where we invited global stakeholders as well as local stakeholders from different municipalities, federal government, as well as provincial government. And I would say, like, when it was meaningful to learn different practices. But I totally agree with you. This is very new, and we need to work more. I would say, like, we lack the culture of sharing, and also we don't have strong institutions that support or back this kind of innovations. But I would say, if I reflect 8 years of federal system and 100 years of central government system, I would say we need to be more hopeful, and more possibilities are coming in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I like your point about how maybe it's the provincial level that is best positioned to lead this cross-municipal knowledge sharing.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I want to get to some of the questions that have shown up in the chat, because I'm seeing some wonderful questions. And let me ask others of you who are listening, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. But before we get to those questions, I'd like to ask each of the 3 of you one more question. And maybe I'm going to ask that you just answer it with 1 or 2 sentences so that we can move to the questions from the group. But I want to ask each of you, what is the role of financing in all of this that we've been talking about? Because these are tough times right now, and education budgets are limited, and external aid, as we know, is being limited. And so I would imagine that that's a really important factor. And so my question for each of you, we'll start with you, Mr. Mluso, is how are you thinking about the relationship between financing and scaling education innovations?
Well, thank you very much. This is not an easy question, to answer.
I know.
Because on the one hand, education is a fundamental human right. And as governments, we must make sure that that right is offered, to its people. Not only that, but education, also is a catalyst for social and economic transformation of any country. And therefore, it needs to really be, regarded as a priority for any country to develop. And in order to do that, obviously, we need, financing. Now, the problem that we have, or the challenge that is there, is obviously almost all countries, or especially the developing countries, they are limited in terms of real financial resources because their economies are growing at a very low rate of GDP. And not only that, but some of the countries, like Malawi, for example, is also prone to frequent climate, natural, disasters, which also require, financing. And then there are a lot of other priorities that need financing. But despite all those challenges, as governments and as policymakers, we've got to make sure that we have enough finance to finance the innovations that we want to scale up. And so it is something that really we have to, as in fact you mentioned earlier on, it's a delicate balancing act that has to be done by governments, and obviously I, as a former Minister of Finance, that was one of the challenges I faced, to make sure that there is enough funding for education, in addition to the other priorities that were putting heavy demands on the budget, but also obviously to seek support from bilateral and indeed multilateral partners to help out where the country we have a shortfall in terms of both technical support as well as financial support. Great. So financing is critical if we have to do really meaningful and impactful innovation, upscaling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sarato, what's your perspective on the relationship between financing and scaling innovations in Honduras?
Bueno, creo que, como mencionó
Well, I think that, just as it was mentioned by Felix Mulusu, financing is complex. In the case of Honduras, our budget, in the majority, goes to pay the staff, the teachers. So the margin that is left, it gives you very little to think about financing innovation. But at the level of a country, some initiatives have been taken that were led by the Minister of Education, Mr. Sponda, and in which he promoted the champion municipalities for education. We tried to organize 298 municipalities with initiatives where everyone was in agreement that were linked to education. So from the mayor's office, they could have additional funding for specific education subjects. And many of the municipalities were following that, and it was successful, absolutely. Very short term, though, but very significant as well. The other thing is, how then can we contribute from the strategic planning side, identifying things that I think evidence is key there. Using evidence, when we have the research and studies that help us aiming to initiatives that could become a real fact in our context or a reality, and then we objectively talk to different people that contribute for education in our country. I think that is one way in which I could say the vision is not easy. Money is a limiting factor, a strongly limiting factor, but that make us more creative to be effectively using the different resources that we receive and allocate them in different structures at a level of ministries around. And we then can be very objective. So we could sit at a table of the cooperating entities saying, we need this and that in that and that way. And many times they're really willing to hear us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jha, one or two sentences, the role of financing and scaling innovations in, for example, Kathmandu.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would say finance is definitely needed, but the biggest challenge is not the availability of resources, but I believe the lack of management, lack of managing the resources is something that creates the barrier towards the innovation. I'll just give you one example. Like in 2018, different multilateral, bilateral, and development agencies, they collaborated to form Green School Directive. And there was a huge challenge in implementation of that program. Now back in 2024, after 6 years, again, new partners, new multilaterals, some new bilaterals, and same development partners, they again came together not to implement the Green School Directive programs, but again to rewrite the program. So I would say like investment on the paperwork cannot ensure the innovations.
Right.
And we are just, like revolving around the wheel, and we are like somewhere, I would say, confused, or we are just saving our job. I don't know, but we are not focusing in the innovation where we need to focus.
Thank you. We have only about 6 minutes, and I wish we could take on all of the questions that have showed up in the chat, but I'm afraid we can only take on a few. I'm going to ask one, and any one of you who wishes to answer should feel free. One of the questions from the chat is, what conditions are essential for the sustainable scaling up of educational innovations in capacity-limited countries? One of you like to answer?
Well, maybe I can, start. I think, some of the conditions that need to be set up is really, to, involve stakeholders. I think there must be, a way or a plan, to make sure that, stakeholders who will be involved in the implementation, in the formulation, and indeed the monitoring of any scaling up of the education system, all those must be involved, including CSOs, that's these NGOs, indeed the donor community, which are the partners. I think there must be that environment created, for all these stakeholders, so that they can also have some ownership, in the innovations, in the scaling up of the innovations, because if they have ownership, they obviously will make sure that they're also committed in terms of delivery, in terms of execution, or indeed implementation, of those, scaling up innovations. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else?
I'll just add one line, one word, I would say. Patience is needed. If you want, patience. It is needed.
Yeah.
Planificación.
Planning.
Yes. I'm going to ask another question that's come up, and this is about whether any of you has any experience in working with innovations that are scaled across multiple countries. We talk about what it's like to think like a government official, but for people who have innovations that they want to scale in multiple countries, do they have to think like multiple different kinds of government officials? Have you had any experience working across other countries in terms of innovations to scale?
I would say like this entire, if we talk about entire world, we share the problem, and the solutions and approach can also be shareable. Before working in Kathmandu metropolitan city, I used to work for Teach for Nepal. And Teach for Nepal is a program, I would say like this kind of program is in more than 70 countries right now. I'm not sure with the number, but maybe around 60 to 70 countries. And their idea is to get a best youth graduates from the university, place them in the school for 2 years, and so that these youth will be able to learn the context of the school, context of the education system, and they can engage themselves for long term in bringing the transformation in the education. I would say like either it's a USA, or maybe it's a Nigeria, or it's a Nepal, or Pakistan, or Peru. We are from different continents, but we share the common context, there is an education inequity in our own country. People get quality education dependent on their birth. So there are common contexts, but the approach is quite different. The approach in Germany and the approach in USA and approach in Nepal and approach in India is different, but the problem is same, and the solution can also be similar.
Yeah, I like that. The structure might be common, but the contents are different. Mr. Mluso or Ms. Sarato, do you want to say anything about these sort of cross-national or global innovations?
Well, thank you, Brett. Of course, I've not had experience, working, across, countries. But what my view is that it's not, that easy because of different levels of development or stages at which the countries are in their, education system. But I think the benefit which can arise from there is obviously the sharing of the knowledge and indeed, the learning by those countries that have not reached those levels, of education. If we take, Southern Africa, for example, the quality of education in the countries, in this region, is really very different. In other countries, the quality of education is really, very high. Whereas in others, not at the same level. And yet, policymakers, in formulating their, plans or policies, they've got to try to at least adopt international standards, because the whole idea must be to bring the level of education, of their education, to the same international standards, as the countries around, and indeed, around the world. So I think it's more, a learning experience when it comes to, cross-border involvement.
Right.
Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Sarato, I'm happy to give you the final word.
Sí. Agradecer por el espacio.
Thank you very much for this space. It's so key to listen to this network learning, sharing with my panel members. Network learning is really what you can get as points in common, as ministries of education, people interested in improving quality of education, trying to transform reality in our countries. So I really believe that we need to learn in these networks, and these initiatives could be kept. They are finally key. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the three of you so much. I've been honored to be part of this conversation with you all. I have frankly learned so much from the three of you, and it inspires me to keep learning and keep working incredibly hard. As you say, Mr. Jha, sometimes we go in circles and we're not necessarily breaking free of the circle. And I think about what it means to do that. Felix Mluso from Malawi, Estefany Sarato from Honduras, Shailendra Jha from Nepal. I want to thank you three so much for joining me in this conversation. I'm going to turn it now back over to Ian McPherson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brad, and to all the panelists for your contributions. Honestly, it was an outstanding discussion. And I think that you bring such honesty, such insight, such candor to this discussion. It's such an interesting nuance on the whole topic around localization. And it's such an important discussion. And your voices in this matter so much. In GPE, we talk about system transformation. Your voices and your insights have the potential to transform systems. So a deep, deep, deep thanks for that. And also for Mr. Jha, your use of the term radical collaboration. That's my new favorite term. So thank you for that. Okay, moving on. GPE KIX operates through complementary mechanisms, knowledge exchange, country support, and applied research projects. And its 4 regional hubs create spaces for GPE partner countries to share innovations and best practices, while applied research builds evidence and strengthens stakeholder capacity to adapt and scale solutions. These mechanisms reinforce one another. Research generates actionable knowledge for scaling, and exchange identifies priorities and promotes uptake. A major milestone this year was the conclusion of the first portfolio of applied research projects, which generated practical evidence across more than 70 countries on 5 priority themes: support for out-of-school children and youth, teacher professional development, early learning, GEI, that is, gender equity and inclusion, and education data systems and data use. To further promote evidence uptake, KIX developed 5 synthesis reports, policy briefs, and related infographics tailored to policymakers and practitioners, which you can access using the QR code on the screen now. KIX is contributing and continuing to support 43 new applied research projects aligned with the 5 established themes, along with 6 new regional observatories that will generate and share evidence on resilience in education systems. These applied research projects ensure that findings are relevant and actionable, producing practical tools, learning materials, and context-specific resources to support evidence use and financing decisions. Next slide, please. We will now move into our second session of the day, focused on developing and using evidence about the cost of scaling innovations. We are very fortunate to have speakers who were directly involved in designing or using costing tools as part of GPE KIX scaling research, and they will be sharing their experiences. And please don't forget, we also want to hear about the tools that you are using for costing and scaling innovations. And please do share them on the virtual whiteboard using the link in the chat. I'm delighted to welcome Joy Nafungo, Senior Program Specialist at the International Development Research Center, who will moderate this session. Joy, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ian, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very final session of the GPE KIX Symposium. And I really thank you for sticking with us until the end, from yesterday, today, till the end of this today's session. So my name is Joy Nafungo, Senior Program Specialist in the GPE KIX program at IDRC. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I will be moderating this session. So the session is titled Developing and Using Evidence About the Costs of Scaling Innovation. And just building on the previous session that Brad moderated, we heard about the different factors and tools that influence the adoption and scaling of innovations by national, but also subnational governments. And one of these tools is costing. Of course, we heard about many factors, financing, resources, structures, and other factors. But one of the tools is costing. And so we would like to take a deeper dive into that particular factor of costing with some practical examples of how this has been achieved, with examples from KIX applied research projects. So while costing is just one of the many factors, it's a critical one. It can make or break the journey of scaling an innovation from pilot to nationwide impact. So we will discuss the role of costing evidence in adopting innovations and securing sustainable funding. And we will hear perspectives from different stakeholders. But before we hear from our speakers, I would like to make a few framing remarks. Next slide, please. So costing and scaling are like, those two wheels of a bicycle. So one cannot move forward without the other, because costing is the process that tells us what an innovation really costs to implement and scale, including the resources, the activities, and the financing required for sustainability. And scaling decisions do not rely only on evidence of impact. They also require clear evidence of affordability and feasibility. And we can all agree that many innovations appear promising, yet without clear costing data, they are at risk of collapsing before they ever reach scale. And I, in fact, saw a comment similar to this in the chat earlier. And so this is becoming even more urgent today in a context where, one, domestic education budgets are constrained. Secondly, governments are expected to deliver more, but with fewer resources. And lastly, a factor that we're all aware, foreign aid for education is on the decline. And without solid costing data and evidence, it's highly unlikely that government officials or donors will champion the uptake and implementation of an innovation. They need to understand what it costs and the implications of these costs for their budgets and activities. So in this panel, we will hear from 2 researchers and a policymaker on cost evidence. We will explore 3 factors. The first one is how cost evidence informed adaptations for affordability, so such as simplifying teacher training, for instance. Secondly, is how cost evidence supported decisions around budgeting and planning for scale. And lastly, also how cost data supported institutionalization, giving governments the confidence that the innovation fits within long-term financing structures. Now, let's meet our panelists representing different parts of the KIX ecosystem. Some have been directly involved in generating cost evidence, while others have used that evidence to guide budgeting, planning, and scale-up decisions within government systems. So we have 3 panelists. The first one is Mr. Kojo Aflaga, who is the research lead at Teaching at the Right Level, Africa. Kojo will share insights from Côte d'Ivoire on the costing of the TAL approach and how those findings supported decisions around national scaling. Our second panelist is Ms. Rosa Maria Moncada, who is the country support coordinator for KIX Latin America and the Caribbean. And she will speak about the TPD at Scale initiative and how costing tools informed evidence-based public investment decisions in Honduras. And last but not least, we have Mr. Ratu Majara, who is the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Education and Training in Lesotho. And Mr. Majara will share how the ECE Accelerator Toolkit has supported investment planning and budgeting for early childhood education. So let's begin with Kojo. And Kojo, you have around 8 minutes. Yes, over to you, Kojo.
Thanks a lot, Joy, for the introduction and for setting the context for this series of presentations that you'll be having. So I'll be presenting on costing the TAL approach to support national scaling in Côte d'Ivoire. And this is work that has benefited from funding from FEED, from the partnership with the Ministry of Education in Côte d'Ivoire as well. And I would like to acknowledge the fact that we also have research funded by the GPE KIX, which has informed the background for this research. Next slide. So as a context and background for this research, Côte d'Ivoire, as many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, has seen a huge increase in enrollment over the last 15 years, going from 75% in the early 2010s to close to 100% now. But we see that learning outcomes remain very low. And in 2019, close to 60% of the students lacked foundational reading skills. Teaching at the right level is the solution that Côte d'Ivoire adopted to address this learning poverty issue. An approach that works by assessing and grouping children according to the actual level, not the grade or the age at which they are. And the approach provides targeted and playful activities for teachers to teach those children. And the approach relies on a strong initial training to teachers and ongoing support at the school for those teachers. Next slide. So TAL started with a pilot of 50 schools in 2019 in Côte d'Ivoire and is supposed to reach all the 18,000 schools of the country by 2027. And of course, scaling creates challenges, including cost. And I think Joy did a good job of telling us why having evidence of cost is important, because it can help planning and scaling up decision, but also it can inform other contexts. And especially given that Côte d'Ivoire is one of the first countries in Africa to scale up the TAL approach, the result that we have here can also inform other contexts. So I'll be talking about mainly one study that we did on how training costs can be lowered based on an A/B test that we did in Côte d'Ivoire, but also briefly talk about other two studies that we are doing. One to to have estimates of the cost effectiveness of the TAL approach in Côte d'Ivoire, but also an effort to cost the whole life cycle of TAL in the country. Next slide. So in the first study, what we did was to see whether it was possible to reduce the TAL costs linked to training while maintaining the same quality. And the research question goes as this: can decentralized training models reduce costs without lowering the quality? So what we did in this study is to think about alternative ways to the status quo, where we have national master trainers go around the country to do the training. The training for TAL goes in cascade, where we have master trainers who train mentors, who are the middle tier actors that we heard about in the first session of this symposium of this day. And in the status quo, those master trainers come from the capital, so the national central level, and they go around to do the training. What we did in this study is to test an alternative where we have master trainers coming from the regions. And of course, they are less experienced than the national master trainers. So then the question as to whether we can reach the same quality with those trainers. We did this study in northern Côte d'Ivoire in the school year 2023-2024, with measurements focusing mainly on training quality and the cost data that is associated. And we also had some information on how this then leads to implementation. Next slide. So what we found was that those regional master trainers, though they were less experienced, were able to achieve the same quality, but coming with a substantially lower cost. We saw the quality in the teachers' training. So teachers had the same level of knowledge when they were trained by the regional master trainers as when they are trained by the national master trainers, but with a huge saving cost in training and in supervision. So I mentioned the cascade training that we have for the TAL approach, with the mentor trained first by the master trainers and then going on to train the teachers. What we saw from this study is that we could reduce 6 times the cost of trainers. So the national master trainers cost in this study 1,624 euros, but we had the regional master trainers who cost only 274 euros. So this is a massive saving the cost. But like I mentioned, the quality of the training as measured by how proficient the teachers were was the same. And we also saw similar quality of implementation, whether the training was done by the regional master trainers or the national master trainers. As policy impact from this study, the ministry has now adopted, so we did this study when the country was not already at full scale, but now that they are going at full scale, they have adopted the model with the regional master trainers. And one key thing that I want to highlight is that this solution has worked mainly because the solution that we tested using the regional master trainers was co-designed with the government. So we work collaboratively with the government at the start of this study to identify promising avenues and to test them. And this has been really helpful for their buy-in and for the adoption later. Next slide. So the two other research that we are currently doing, the first one is to have estimates of the cost effectiveness of the TAL approach in Cote d'Ivoire. And for that, you obviously need to have some estimate of the impact. And we have had external researchers who did an impact evaluation of the TAL approach in the southwestern part of the country, where the results, as in many other countries where the TAL approach is implemented, show that TAL does lead to improvement in learning outcomes for children, and especially strong gain for students who are at the lower level of learning. And what we're now doing is to come with the cost that is associated with those learning gains. So how much euros or dollars or francs CFA in this case, you have to invest to have that impact that we see for the children. And this is a study on the way. We hope to have the results in January that will then be shared. Next slide. The final study that we're working on is to have a costing of the full life cycle, still the previous slide, yeah, of the approach. And what we're doing is that we're collecting costs for all the phases of the scale-up, starting from the co-design that was done with the ministry to start implementation, then the pilot, the first estimation, and the national scale-up. And the goal will be to identify which of those stages and which of the cost categories are the main drivers of costs when TAL is being implemented, with the hope that these results can inform other countries implementing the TAL approach. We have now, I believe, between 17 and 20 countries where the TAL approach is being implemented, and some of those countries thinking about going to national scale. So having estimates on how the cost goes as you go to national scale will be really informative for those contests, although we know that there will be some specificities in each contest. Yeah, this is all I wanted to present. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to our discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Kojo. And thanks also for keeping time. And for those insights, you clearly demonstrate how cost evidence can sharpen delivery models and make scaling financially realistic, but also as a cost saving measure. And really good to hear that Cote d'Ivoire is the first country to take the TAL approach to national scale. And also the lesson, the highlight that shifting to regional master trainers contributed to a major saving in the training costs. And I will get back to you with some follow-up questions, but I would now like to invite Rosa Maria. And Rosa Maria, like I said earlier, will be reflecting on how costing tools guided investment discussions in Honduras and how valuable those costing tools are. Welcome, Rosa Maria.
Muchísimas gracias, Joy, por la invitación a ser
Thank
parte de
you
este
very much, Joy,
simposio.
for
Creo que es
being part of this
importante para
symposium.
KIX.
I think it is very important for KIX. I will present the scaling up project of teachers mediated by technology in Honduras. This adapting and scaling teacher professional development is to give a continuous delivery model. We will see how we costed this project. The model was tested through a mathematics course and was given to teachers of 7th to 9th grade. A class was prepared, the technology was prepared, the usability process was done, and tutors were trained. This class was given to more than 800 teachers. The model considered the use of the platform that currently is used by the Secretary of Education, and it was also considered one tutor per 40 participants, which is the context where this initiative was done. What is the cost of this? What are the costs generated through the implementation process? The course was given at a central level by a team of mathematics teachers, part of the professional development side of Honduras for teachers.
costos, claro que sí.
And
Sí,
of
había
course, it
que
included the
calcular
costs,
las horas
costs that need
invertidas
to
de
be
cada uno de los
calculated
grupos
with
matemáticos.
hours invested in each of
El
these
curso contaba con 6 módulos
mathematicians,
desarrollados
with
en
6
6
modules
semanas
developed
con una
in
dedicación
throughout
de
6
aproximadamente
weeks,
5
with a
horas por
dedication of
semana para
approximately
cada
5 hours
participante.
per week per
Y
participant.
eso sí generó costos
That,
asociados
of course, generated
precisamente
costs
a todos los
related
videos,
to
los interactivos,
specifically
desarrollar todos los materiales que se
video,
iban a poner
interactive material to be
disponibles para los
online,
maestros.
available for the
Se
teachers,
implementó un proceso de
and a
formación y
process of
capacitación de los
training
tutores,
and
cuyo
was
principal costo
prepared for
era
tutors, and the main
la
cost was
pequeña
a little
capacitación que se hizo a nivel
training
presencial.
at a presence level.
Adicionalmente,
First,
también se incurrieron
additionally,
en costos de
they had
conexión para los tutores
cost
una vez
of
que ya
connection
estaba
for
establecido
tutors
el
once
curso.
the class was established,
Había un interés particular
and
de
there
dar el
was a
curso
specific
con
interest
el tema de
in
equidad,
this
porque se
class for
estaba llevando a 5
the
departamentos
equality.
de los 18 departamentos que tiene
In
Honduras,
5 of the
pero también
departments
incluía
of
zonas
the 18th department
urbanas,
of
rurales, pero
Honduras, it
también había
included
otras que
urban,
estaban
rural areas,
remotas.
but some that
Realmente
are
se
really
pensaba
remote,
en todos los
and
maestros que estaban
it was thought
aún
of
allá
all
más
the
lejos de las
teachers, even
montañas.
in the remote side, far
Un
from the
dato
mountains.
importante,
An important piece of
quizás la
data.
tenemos
Maybe
en la
we
figura anterior.
continue to have the previous slide, please. The previous slide.
El previous slide.
Thank you.
Quisiera que vieran la foto de los tutores.
Please look
Ese
at the
es
picture
un dato
of
importante
tutors.
porque esta
For us,
iniciativa se
it
llevó
is
a
an
cabo
important piece.
precisamente
The
en
initiative was
pandemia.
precisely
Y
during the pandemic.
durante esa pandemia,
During the pandemic,
el interés en el país
the
estaba
interest of
grandísimo
the country
de
was
poderse
really
capacitar
big
en
to
línea
be
a
able
los
to be
maestros,
trained online,
porque
specifically for
las
teachers,
escuelas estaban cerradas.
as the schools were
Y
closed.
el curso realmente se convirtió en algo muy
The
valioso para los
class was
docentes.
really helpful for the
Fue una
teachers.
iniciativa también en
And it was
3
an
países,
initiative in
como
3
KIX. Se llevó
countries
a cabo también
as
la misma
KIX.
iniciativa
So that
en
same initiative
Uzbekistán,
was
en
in
Ghana y en
Uzbekistan,
Honduras,
Ghana,
todos
and Honduras,
diseñando un modelo
all
de
designing
formación
one
docente.
model for
Siguiente
teachers
slide.
delivery model. Next slide, please.
Precisamente con el proceso de costeo que
In the
se llevó a
costing
cabo
process,
con la herramienta
we
C3,
use the
que por
tool
las siglas
so-called
en inglés es
C3
Childhood
for its
Cost Calculator.
Childhood Cost Calculator
Esta es
acronym in
una
English.
herramienta que en ese momento estaba siendo probada
This
por
tool
Blue
was
Keys.
started by Blue
Ellos la
Keys.
desarrollaron en
They
Tangerine,
developed
en el
that
y
in
también
Tangerine,
fue un
and
momento ideal
it was
para
the ideal
a la hora que
moment
se estaba haciendo
for the test.
esta herramienta.
For
También
that tool,
podríamos nosotros llevar a cabo
we were
esta misma
able
escala de cálculo.
to make that
Desde
same
el punto de vista de costo,
scale.
podíamos estudiar
From the
cuál era
point of
la
view of cost, we
implementación.
were able to
Nosotros
study the implementation.
llegamos a esta
We
herramienta a
arrived to
través
the
de la
tool
gestión del programa ROSI,
through
que no están
Rosie's
aquí, y
program that I see
agradecemos
was
públicamente esa
mentioned, and
gestión.
they're here, so we really
Aquí también en el
appreciate
chat
that.
vamos a dejar lo que
In the
es
chat, we will write
el link para poder
the
llegar
link
al informe
so you
que
can
se
arrive to
hizo
a report,
durante este estudio del costeo,
which is
y
done
también
in
pueden
this
bajar
costing
la herramienta
study,
que ya está
and you
disponible en
can
línea.
download the tool that
El
is
primer
available
paso
online.
de costeo fue
The first
primero
step
conformar un
was
equipo
first
integrado por diversos
making
actores.
up a
La
team,
Secretaría de Educación, la
I mean,
Universidad
preparing the team,
Pedagógica que estaba
education
conduciendo el curso,
secretary and the pedagogical education giving the
especialmente el
class,
Departamento de
and
Finanzas
the
de Formación
finance
Docente
department of
de la
teachers
Secretaría de
training
Educación.
from the Secretariat of
Luego, a
Education.
continuación, se elaboró
After
un
that,
listado de costos.
a list of
Esto
costs was
incluía
prepared,
el diseño
which
del curso,
included
las
the
horas
design of
invertidas,
the
la
course,
producción
time
tecnológica. También
allocated,
se hizo
technology
un chatbot,
production,
que era
also a chatbot,
respuestas
which
automatizadas.
were automated
Todos estos
answers.
componentes se
All
desglosaban
these components
minuciosamente
were
para
broken
asegurar que
down
cada elemento
carefully
era realmente
so we can make
costeado.
sure that each element
Es
was
importante
costed.
destacar que en muchísimas
It is important to
ocasiones los
highlight that
costos
in many
asociados
situations, the
al
cost that
tiempo
is
del personal
associated to the
permanente
time of the
quedan
permanent
como
staff
ocultos, y
remain
eso es
hidden.
común en
That is very
algunas
common
de las
in
iniciativas
some of the
en educación,
initiatives in
porque como son hechas
education.
por empleados
As they are
permanentes,
prepared
entonces
by
no
permanent
se costea
employees,
estas horas de inversión,
the the costs invested in those other hours are not costed, but in this exercise we did. We did it in such a way that we were able to deduct the time invested per person in designing the course and also delivery of it. Something that was important in the process, it was the categorization of costs. The tool requires or demands for the category of costs according to the nature, to its nature, if it is personal, if it is infrastructure, if it is material or materials. And it is determined if it is investment as such, like designing the course, or if it is recurrent cost, like moving a tutor or a participant from one place to another. P3 Citrus tool is friendly. Once you have the resources assigned, the results are easily obtained. This type of analysis is not just allowing us to know the cost of the initiative itself, which is a course for 800 mathematics teachers, and produce it, but it assess also the cost benefit and compare the different modalities of delivery in the training. I wouldn't like to forget that this exercise generated benefits, very helpful for the Secretary. One, promoting collaboration as it brought staff from different units. Second, strengthening internal capacity of the Secretariat in costs. Enabling also the disclosure and propagating information. So for decision makers, it was better that they were able to see what we were doing. And of course, the structure of costs allows for the fragmentation in such a way that each fragment or some fragments could use data for some cost that would come later. Next slide, please.
This is a photo of how the tool, once you include the costs that you have already selected, it shows you the results in this graph, in this pie chart, and this helps us, and it's very attractive when we have to explain these initiatives to the decision makers or authorities. Next slide, please. So what were the findings after the costing exercise? I would like to say that using this calculator, such as the C3 tool, or performing any kind of cost exercise for this tool and trying to do this well organized, structured, allows equipped teams to identify aspects of the initiative that might define the cost of the implementation, and that it is real for what it implies to do this or to run this initiative. But it's a very valuable initiative to plan and to think on scaling it up. One of the key findings here was that the cost of online delivery was 20% of the cost of what would have been an in-person delivery. The exercise revealed that face-to-face training methods require less investment in the design phase and in the course production, of course, because it is not the same to do all the design, to do this online, but also the in-person mode, as we all know. The mobilization costs significantly increase the cost of the process, and scaling up the initiative is, for many of the system, it's almost prohibitive. So,
sorry for cutting you short. If you could just start to wind up. Thank you.
Okay, gracias. ¿Cuáles fueron las decisiones que hicieron los financistas?
So what were the decisions of the financing people or staff or group, so this could be delivered independently. We also had other studies that led to the online delivery of a certification or diploma for a secondary degree. That was very important. And also the hybrid deliveries, because the participants thought that this should be, this is easier, but there is preference of doing that in person. So in general terms, we believe that the cost process helped a lot to other initiatives that came after. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosa Maria, for those insights. And you have showed that costing helped the team rethink delivery options, so between modular and tutored and alternative formats. And you also demonstrate that the same approach supported larger financial assessments, including the online secondary diploma, what you just spoke about, and that it guided decisions on hybrid models that fit both preferences and budget. So thank you for sharing, Rosa Maria. I will also get back to you with some follow-up questions. But we will now move on to our third, last but not least, presenter, Principal Secretary Ratu Majara, who will share about the ECE Accelerator Toolkit in Lesotho. Welcome, Mr. Majara.
Yes, thank you, Joy, and thanks to the panel members and the other participants who are joining online. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much. Let me start by thanking the GPE KIX for making resources available to our staff who were trained on developing and using evidence about the cost of skilling innovation. The officers went out of the country and they came back with these tools that we have used in Lesotho. Next slide, please. Let's have the next slide. Yes, thank you. We have the tools that we used to give us information about the cost of skilling innovation. The first tool that we have is called the PowerPoint deck template. That template outlines key ECE advocacy messages. And the manner in which this tool was used is that we used it to sensitize the parents and communities about the importance of ECE in their respective places. Let me hasten to indicate that in Lesotho, we are in the process of making everybody understands and appreciate the value of investing in ECCD. And therefore, that tool was critical in giving us the platform and the skills to go around in the country, talk to the parents, to send their children to schools, and also for the communities to make their resources available for the opening up of the ECD in their localities. The government is also attaching the centers to existing primary schools. So that is how this tool was used. It was used to sensitize, and then it has proved beneficial in that regard. The second is the tip sheet, strategic ideas for establishing ECE technical working group. the ECE, because we are talking about the small ones here who are below the ages of 5, the approach that we use to nurture them is multi-sectoral. That means we don't get people from just education alone. We get experts, we get support from finance, from social development, from protection unit, other sectors, because nurturing a child requires much more. Things like health as well. So the technical working group is comprised of experts from various ministries in the country, so that the kind of support that we render is a holistic one to enable the child to grow well. So that tool, therefore, it was beneficial in informing us on how best to form these groups, as well as to revise the terms of reference that will guide how the group would be working. That team also worked in the development of the curriculum. The curriculum is very important here, because these learners, these children, when we take them to the centers, we don't just take them to the centers there to sleep, but there is a lot of learning that takes place. Even sleeping is part of learning. It has to be guided. It has to be under the tutelage of someone who is trained to guide them. So the curriculum that was developed takes care of whatever activities that the learners are exposed to, should be the activities that are age appropriate, that are relevant, and that will ensure that as they progress to the next levels, then they will have learned something. The next one is the preschool, pre-primary subsect analysis. That analysis was important in helping us to identify the gaps in the subsector. These gaps, we use them to develop the early child, the ECE chapter in our sector plan. We also used that analysis to collect the data, which we analyzed to ensure that whatever we are doing there is informed by evidence. I must also indicate that the analysis and the information that came out of that was also translated into local language, so that people could understand what this is all about. The third one is the simulation model. The simulation model that was used there confirmed one important factor, that as we scale up, we can only do so for 1 year, giving the resources available in the country. So that is what it informed us, that as we scale up, that can only happen for not more than 1 year. So it was important for decision-making process, so that we know what is in for us. And then we have the last one, which is the joint early childhood subsector review, which happened in 2023. And that review was also important in that the recommendations that were received from that review helped us as we planned our activities going forward. Next slide, please. Yes, these are the findings from the costing analysis. The findings are clearing in that they indicate that there is marginal increase in the allocation of funds for education. I mean for ECE subsector. In 2022, it was 7%, 2025, still 7%. So what this shows is that there is marginal or no increase at all in the amount of resources earmarked for this subsector. So it is telling, it is giving us a lot of information that more has to be done by government. I think even this information, as we present it to our partners, they're able to understand that a lot of support is needed in this area, that the government is not doing enough, and therefore this is one area where they can make the resources available. But let me say this, that this analysis has also been important in enabling the government to meet its partners with data that is readily available to convince our partners that there are gaps in funding, which then should be filled through support from the from partners. So this is what the findings have shown, and therefore the figures are telling in that there is a shortfall in terms of the resources that have been made available for this. How evidence gathered through the costing exercise informed scaling and financing decisions for EC in Lesotho. One, we shared this evidence to our partners, and they responded a great deal in that some funds, a considerable amount of money has been unlocked through the GPE.
Mr. Majara, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could just start wrapping up, please.
Thank you. So some money has been unlocked through the GPE and the Royal Federal Foundation, and also support has been unlocked through the CRS. CRS stands for Catholic Relief Services. Again, a lot of money has been unlocked from the private sector foundations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Majara, for those insights. You have shown how the ECE Accelerator Toolkit has been far, of course, more than a costing toolkit. It's also helped Lesotho to strengthen its advocacy for ECE. You started with that, mobilizing communities to send their children to ECE centers, very, very important aspect. Guiding multi-sectoral coordination, looking at the multi-sectoral nature of early childhood education, supporting curriculum development, and also highlighting the most critical gaps in the sector. And this shows that just how clear an example, this is, how structured tools can shape both investment decisions and also broader system strengthening. So thank you so much for sharing. And now I'd like to thank all our three speakers, Mr. Majara, Ms. Rosa Maria, and Mr. Kojo, for sharing such rich insights. And before we turn to the Q&A in the chat, I see a couple of questions already. I would like just to take a few minutes with a few follow-up questions as you are speaking. And I would like to start with you, Kojo. So given the global education financing crisis, what makes costing analysis essential rather than optional for informed decisions and investments?
Thanks a lot, Joy. And I think we can even think of this question more generally, why costing is important. This is, we know that we have limited resources anyway, as government, as different institutions. So we need to make sure that we have value for the money that we're using, and that we analyze the cost structure that you have to see how we can be more efficient in this use of the resources that we have. So that's why it is important when we implement, and especially when we scale, to have information about what is driving our costs, but also what is the value that we are getting for the money that we are investing. And this is even more crucial when you are in an environment where the funds that organizations and countries can access through international aid, you need to make sure to show that you are indeed providing the highest value for the dollar that's all the money that you can get. And that's why it is important, especially crucial, not optional anymore, to have estimates of the cost driver, and also to the extent possible, the value that you bring in for the money that is being invested. At the end, it becomes a competition among organizations to get those limited resources that are available in these days. So providing evidence that you do have value for your money will go a long way to get you those investments. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Kojo. Rosa Maria, would you like to answer the same question?
Bueno, yo creo que
Sure. I would say I believe resources are always limited, and the information systems or education systems, in fact, she corrects herself, are in the debate of what they want to achieve and what you can achieve. So the costing exercise is really important, as first, in the systems, they can identify what they could do and how big the scale is. That creates discipline in teams, which it's important to be done in each of the initiatives, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa Maria. You just mentioned something very important, what they want to achieve and what they can actually achieve. I think that's something that I'll take with me from this session as well. And Mr. Majara, would you like to answer the same question?
Thank you so much. Costing is very important. We can't do without it. It is important for decision-making processes because it informs us what resources are available and what resources will be needed for the innovation that you want to go into. So without without costing, we are bound to fail. So it is important in that regard. Also, it is important to, since resources are limited, as you cost, you're able to judge how much cost to do a certain activity, and therefore you're able to prioritize. So priority is very important here, so that you put those things that come first in the list.
Great, thank you. So I heard from Kojo about value for money, of course, evidence about value for money and efficiency. I heard from Rosa Maria about prioritizing, and I think Mr. Majara also alluded to that, prioritizing given the, of course, many priorities already, but identifying what can be done first and with what resources, and that's the purpose of costing. The second question, again, is from your perspective, what makes costing analysis relevant and actionable for policymakers? What helps it to actually be used? And I will start with you, Mr. Majara.
Thank you so much. It makes it relevant in the sense that for costing, like I said, without it, we are bound to repeat the same mistakes. We are bound to fail. And therefore, as you cost, that helps you to see where to put your money. It helps us to see which things to forego and which things we can advance. Taking cognizance of the resource envelope that we have. It is also relevant in that we can use the same question now to have discussions with our partners to say this is what it takes to advance this area, and therefore it informs our discussions with the partners to say how much they can put in on the table so that now we can then work together. So it is important in that regard.
Yes, indeed, credibility, showing where and why there needs to be investment. Rosa Maria?
I believe that something that is of utmost importance, maybe if you allow me, with 3 words, why I think it is relevant. First, feasibility. Can or can't we? Can we do it or we can't do it? Second, planning. Can we really make it at a national level and deploy it at a national level? And third, and it's super important, alternatives. If I can't do it, what's my alternative? Based on costs, then you really make it easy looking for alternatives. And if you allow me to add a 4th one, what was just said by Majara, you give space to reflect within the teams and open the dialogue. I think it gives so many advantages in a system if we go through these processes. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Rosa Maria. Kojo?
Yeah, I think in general, it's always difficult to take decision without having the data to back it, right? And especially doing the analysis to see where you need to take the action. So I think what I'll add to what Majara and Rosa Maria already said is that it's relevant in that it can help realize where gains can be made, when efficiency can be made, look into what adaptations can be made, and provide a lot of elements to take decision, to take the best action based on the limited resources that you have anyway. So in that sense, it's make the decision making about what action to take given the limited resources more easy.
Yeah, very important, Kojo. Thank you so much. And so the third question is, I'm curious, within your respective programs and for you, Mr. Majara, in your ministry, which elements of your costing analysis resonated most with you? But specifically, what persuaded you to make a case for investment? I think you have all mentioned that in one way or another, but if you could just perhaps 1 or 2 things that persuaded you to make a case for investment in the program or in the ministry.
Okay, thank you. I think one element that resonated with us was the clearing picture that as we scale up, that scaling up is only possible for 1 year. We cannot go beyond 1 year. And because we are convinced that the ECE is an important layer where greatest investment must go. So we were able to persuade those we finance that because we want to invest here, and therefore the resources are in short supply, let's do more. And I must really say we have managed to solicit some support from partners, from private sector, even from government, because I think the literature, the research is telling in the findings that an investment in ECE is an important one for the learner to be able to progress, as well as for that learner now to succeed in life. So those facts, as you present them, then you are able to convince the decision makers, especially those with the purse, that for the country to progress, that first layer of education is an important one. So I think, yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Majara. Kojo, what elements resonated with you the most?
Yes, I think in our case, the analysis was sort of straightforward for what you have done already, right? Because we had an idea and we wanted to test how this is feasible. But I think in the process of the analysis, one thing that was really critical to us was how important collaboration is with the government. Both, I think costing in general requires to have very good data, like a good structure for the data, like Rosa Maria presented for the tools that they have, and I guess what Majora has for the tool that the GPE KIX provided with them. But collaboration is really key to get buy-in, but also to be able to have the information. It's already difficult for South Africa as like internally to get the cost structure and the cost information. So having that collaboration with the government to have buy-in and to have access is really critical. Yeah, and that's what has been the most important factor for me in all the analysis that we're conducting.
Thank you, Kojo. And Rosa Maria, briefly.
Yo creo que de lo que más
I
me
think
resuena es que
that from
costos
what
solo
I
una perspectiva,
hear,
solo un
costs
aspecto,
is just
porque
one
todavía
perspective,
tenemos que
just one
analizarlo en
aspect. We still need
interpretabilidad,
to analyze
tenemos que analizarlo sobre
quality,
equidad,
we
estamos
still
viendo
need to
todos
analyze
de igual forma y no
equity or
exhaustando la
equality.
brecha, más
It
bien,
needs to be
y
equal
también
to everyone
algo
to bridge that gap.
desde mi punto de vista es
And
sumamente
something
importante
that is
es
super
la
important
preferencia.
from my point of view is
¿Cuál es
the
el contexto? ¿Qué es
preferences.
lo que
What
dice
is the
la población
context?
que
What the
prefiere?
population is telling me that they need and
te da una
prefer.
dimensión.
So
Eso es lo que
cost
más
will
me
give you at
resuena.
least one dimension. That is what resounds to me.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. So I see we only have 5 minutes, and let's go to the chats. We can take 1 or 2 questions from the chats before we wrap up. I see a question for Kojo. What are the elements that form costs, and how does it compare between the two groups? Let me just read the whole question. Appreciating the model adapted for its cost effectiveness, how the gaps of TOT's cascading transmission model compared with developing collaborative and self-learning models that transformative. Moreover, you have reported that the quality of the training delivered among the regions were the same. What were your justifications through the TOTs having the same training competencies? Over to you, Kojo, in 2 minutes.
Okay, in terms of the competencies, and especially for the teachers, that was, and also the master trainers, that was a learning question, right? We didn't know upfront whether they have the same quality. All we knew was that they didn't have the same experience, the same exposure. So that's why we were worried that maybe they might not have the same quality, and thus we put together this study to study the question. We had some sense of what were the key cost drivers, and we also had some categorization of the costs, the training, the supervision afterwards, and the implementation, including the materials. And all those costs besides training were not linked to who was training, right? It was, the supervision, the master trainers sometimes go to the field to do the supervision, but it's mostly the mentors that provide this supervision. The materials is the same across the two groups. So that's why we were able to focus solely on the cost of training to see whether we're getting gains in terms of lowering the cost, and also looking at the quality to say whether there was any loss in that sense. Yeah, that'll be my short answer for those 2 questions.
Great. Thank you, Kojo. We have 1 more question, and Majara, Rosa Maria, or Kojo, feel free to take this. If you can only afford to scale up for 1 year, do you choose between the right model, or do you look for different ways to financially sustain the model? Who would like to take this in 1 minute or so?
Yes, I can take that. Sustainability is important. I think it is important to look at the sustainability because if we miss that, then it means you are bound to fail. What you need to do as you innovate or as you put the program in place, ensure that that program is sustained. So look at ways and means of ensuring that resources are available all the time. Otherwise, it is going to be rendered a waste of resources. If for a start there is money, but as we go forward, then there are no funds. So sustainability is key.
Great. So Mr. Majara, Ms. Rosa Maria, and Mr. Kojo, thank you so much for your wisdom and thoughtful insights on costing and cost evidence. Of course, through your sharing, we have seen how costing can move from an abstract concept to a practical tool that supports real decisions about feasibility, about adaptation, about budgeting, and also about sustainability. And with that, we'll now hand over the session back to Ian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy, and to all of our panelists for these insightful examples of how incorporating costing into research can help implementers and policymakers make informed decisions about adopting and scaling innovations and securing sustainable financing for them. I really appreciated actually in this panel how cost effectiveness studies and evidence is obviously so central to government planning, but this for me highlights the relevance of evidence and the point also made by Kojo about collaboration. And actually, unless and until you have relevant evidence and collaboration, it won't be used and it won't be taken up. So thank you so much for highlighting these points. We look forward to learning about additional examples that have been shared in the digital whiteboard. And we'd now like to move to ask you to take a moment to reflect on some of your key takeaways from today. And we'd invite you to put your answer in the chat, but don't send it immediately. We want you just to kind of reflect a little bit. Put your answer to the chat and we'll wait about 15 seconds. And then when I say go, then please hit send and hopefully the chat will populate with a number of the different insights from yourselves. So just take a moment. Key insights, it could be one word, it could be a very short phrase. Key insights from the two excellent panels that we've heard from today. Okay, I'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, 3, 2, 1, hit send, please. Wonderful. We have information, strong, clear information, costing, evidence being key to scaling. I appreciate the point on collaboration and sense making. Super important. Collaboration is key. Thank you for these, and please continue to share your takeaways in the chat. Evidence-based innovation, cost effectiveness, and we can always learn from the South. I think that is a fabulous point, actually, to pivot to our next piece just before closing. A number of these answers really reflect both the heart and the spirit of the conversations that we are having in KIX. And before we move to closing, we invite you to watch a very short video, just less than 2 minutes, that celebrates this spirit of KIX and the transformative goals that we are collectively pursuing together. So I'll pass over to my colleagues for the video.
At GPE KIX, we don't just imagine quality education for all. We build the solutions,
share the best ideas,
and support scaling innovations that work.
We are the seekers,
the builders,
the change makers.
In a world where education financing faces its greatest challenge in decades, smart, evidence-informed investment
is more critical than ever.
GPE KIX is a platform driving research in education systems.
Our innovations are homegrown,
rooted in our realities,
and driven by our shared commitment.
They are not just ideas.
They are solutions to catalyze transformation.
We are built on systems of support, connection, and collaboration
woven together by researchers, regional hubs,
policymakers, funders, and GPE country-level processes.
Together, we are using evidence-informed investments and resource allocation
to reach more learners by scaling what works
in a way that is equitable and for the long term.
This is how we turn evidence into action.
This is how we multiply possibilities.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, colleagues, for all the inputs to that video that I think really reflects the spirit of KIX. So let me now introduce Margarita Focus-Licht, Director of Partnerships at the Global Partnership for Education, who will share some key takeaways from today and provide closing remarks. Let me thank all of you for attending this event, and please do stay connected by following our activities on the GPE KIX website or through our monthly newsletter. Let's continue strengthening our collaboration, building cultures of evidence use, and tightening the integration of evidence, policy, and financing. When knowledge flows, policy evolves, and financing follows. Thank you, merci, gracias, obrigado. Margarita, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. And I almost feel like you've already given excellent closing remarks, but I will speak anyway. Well, distinguished colleagues, partners, and friends, as we close this 6th KIX Global Symposium, I want to thank each of you for your reflections and comments, and especially the various speakers for their interesting and insightful presentations and reflections. I have to say, it's so helpful to sit here and learn from concrete examples and experience like those we've heard from the speakers here today and also yesterday. So over these 2 days, we have focused on how to use evidence to inform financing decisions and scale innovations that truly transform learning outcomes. And the conversation could not be more timely. As highlighted in the opening remarks, education systems today face unprecedented fiscal pressures, rising debt burdens, climate shocks, and competing priorities, yet the need to invest in learning has never been greater. And evidence is our compass in this complex landscape. It tells us what works, where resources have the greatest impact, and how to scale solutions sustainably. The Global Partnership for Education is entering a pivotal moment as we move into our next strategy period, which overlaps with the last stretch of the Sustainable Development Goals to be attained by 2030. And as we advance a renewed sustainable financing agenda and move forward with our upcoming replenishment. As GPE's evidence arm, KIX is not just a platform for ideas, it's a mechanism for turning evidence into action. From scaling teacher professional development in Africa to leveraging technology for inclusive education in Asia, KIX-supported innovations show what's possible when evidence drives investment. So 3 messages stand out as we look ahead. 1, evidence is essential for sustainable financing. Governments, system stakeholders, and financing partners need confidence that every dollar invested in education delivers results. By embedding evidence in financing decisions, we reduce risk and maximize impact. Secondly, scaling requires alignment with national priorities. Innovations can be scaled when they're integrated into nationally owned and driven sector plans and reforms,
and when supported by predictable financing. And critically, when they meaningfully involve mid-level stakeholders, as we heard in the really interesting panel earlier today. And third, in GPE, we believe that partnership is our greatest asset. The GPE community, including partner country governments, civil society, teachers, foundations, researchers, multilateral organizations, and development partners. This community demonstrates that inclusive, effective collaboration can accelerate learning and scaling. So as we move forward, let's commit to champion evidence-based investment in education as part of the work we collectively do, and as a core component of policy dialogue and implementation. Secondly, let's commit to support financing models that enable innovation to scale sustainably. Sustainable financing is not just about raising funds, it's about ensuring that those funds transform education for millions of children. And finally, let's continue to strengthen the role of KIX as a global public good, ensuring that knowledge and evidence is available to partner country governments according to their needs and their context, and that evidence informs decisions both at the global and country level. So thank you so much for your engagement, your insights, and your dedication. Goodbye.